Okay, so I'm back once again, but this time you'll notice I don't have Nikon rangefinders. I have Nikon SLRs, two of them in fact. I have a Nikon FM2T and a Nikon FE. And I'm going to kind of give a bit of an overview and comparison about the two different systems here, the FMs and the FEs. I see a lot of debate online, people asking, should I buy an FM or an FE, or should I buy a FM2 or FE2? Sometimes they'll throw in an FM3A if they're a little bit more precocious, I guess. But I'm going to go over a brief overview and just generally describe the differences between the FE series and the FM series. I'm not really going to talk too much about the lenses. These just were the lenses on them. I got an AIS series 28mm f2.8 on the FE, and I've got an old, very early 35mm f2.8 on the FM2T, and this was actually factory modified for AI compatibility, just if you want to know, but I'm not really going to talk about them too much because it's the cameras I'm focusing on, not so much the lenses. So these two cameras are very similar. If you look at them, you can obviously spot the color difference. This one's black, this one's got what they call the champagne finish. There's not really a big difference. I mean, you'll see small details like the little self-timer lever here. I mean, pretty much everything else on them is more or less identical. I guess the shutter release buttons are a little bit different. You've got this little compensator over here on the FE. The big difference between these two cameras is the internal workings. The FMs are fully mechanical, so everything in them is powered by gears and springs. They do have a battery slot on the bottom, and you put a couple of LR44 batteries in there, and that powers the light meter, but it only powers the light meter, so when the batteries die, the camera still works. You can advance the film, you can set the shutter speeds, the shutter will fire, you just don't have a light meter. The FE, on the other hand, is automatic. Everything in it is electronic. You can manually set all your shutter speeds, but you can also set it to an auto mode, and the internal circuitry will choose the appropriate shutter speed based on the aperture you've already put in. And again, it has a light meter, of course. It has the same batteries, but the problem is when the batteries die on this camera, you lose the light meter and you lose most of the functionality. You don't obviously have the automatic mode, but even a lot of the other faster shutter speeds don't work. The only shutter speed that'll work at that point is this M90, which is a mechanical 1/90th of a second backup speed. I don't know why Nikon went with the M90. They did that on the original FE. They did it on some of the Nikonuses and I think a couple of other cameras. And they switched over and I think made it 250th of a second on the FE2. So I don't know why they decided to go with that on this particular camera model. It is quite odd. I would have much preferred them go with 125th of a second. That's just a lot easier for me to calculate on an f-stop scale. So a bit of a weird quirk, but that's just how it is. It does also have an exposure compensator up here. If you want to set it to automatic, you can use the exposure compensator and kind of go plus, minus 1 or 2 if you want. That's basically the big difference between these two cameras, is the usability of the batteries. So the big debate is, which one should I get? And my 2 cents is, it kind of depends on what you want to do. If you're a really casual shooter, you'll probably be fine with the FE. It's a little bit easier to use. You can set it to auto, and you don't have to worry too much about the exposure. These seem to expose pretty accurately. If you're a little bit more professionally inclined or a bit more of a collector, you might want to go with the FMs. It seems like, generally speaking, the FM series is a little bit more reliable. The electronic parts in these cameras they tend to give out. I don't know what it is, if it's corrosion or short circuits or what, but over time it seems like a lot of them just kind of stop working. And there's very few people who will fix these, almost no one. Whereas with the FMs, they just don't seem to break as much, and when they do break, there are more people who will fix them. It won't necessarily be cheap, but they are a little bit more fixable. It's kind of hard to compare these two cameras really specifically because this is a Nikon FM2T, which is actually a Nikon FM2N, but with sort of a titanium body, hence why it has this strange, what they call a champagne finish, which is kind of a gold color. This is an original Nikon FE, so they're kind of different. You'll notice that the original FE only has a 1,000th of a second shutter speed, whereas I believe the original FM might have only had a 1,000th of a second, but the FM2 and the FM2 would go all the way up to 1/4000th of a second, and I believe the FE2 would go to at least 1/2000th of a second. I don't think it went up to 1/4000th of a second, but I can't quite remember. So if you're looking for faster shutter speeds for some reason, an FM is a better option for you because you get faster shutter speeds on pretty much every model, and they go, I think just generally speaking, they go higher on the FM2 than they do the FE2. Of course, again, you have the automatic functionality on the FE. Even though you're you lose a little bit of reliability with the battery life. It is a little bit easier to use, and I think a lot of people will appreciate that. There's not really a whole lot of differences other than that. The one thing I would note is that the light meters are kind of different, but I think that is more due to the nature. This is a first generation camera, and this is essentially like a third generation camera. The light meter in the FE, and I believe the original FM, is a needle meter where there's a little needle that kind of points at an exposure point. Whereas with the, I know the FM2N, I'm not sure about the original FM2, and the FM3A have sort of an LED where there's a little O that lights up if you're properly exposed, and then above it there's a plus sign, and below it there's a minus sign. And if you're overexposed, it's plus. If you're underexposed, it's a minus. If you're somewhere kind of on the border, it'll give you a circle with a little bit of the plus or the minus lit up to give you an idea of what your exposure is and how accurate it is. I actually prefer the LED meter on the FM2 style cameras. Some people prefer these needle meters. I don't really know why. I think the LED ones are a lot easier to see. That's just my preference. I know everyone has their preference, and it's kind of hard to convince them otherwise. But I just prefer the FM2 series, and I think you do need to find an FM2N to get the LED meter, but I could be mistaken there. Probably should have done a little bit more research for this video, but generally speaking, that's the differences between the FM and the FE. So once again, to kind of sum it up, FM, all mechanical. Generally speaking, you get faster shutter speeds, very reliable. Oftentimes a little bit more expensive, but that's kind of debatable. Very good cameras. My personal suggestion would be an FM. FEs are a little bit easier to use because of the automatic functionality. Sometimes you will lose a little bit in the way of shutter speed, but they're generally speaking pretty reliable compared to most other cameras out there. They're a little bit easier to use, and generally speaking they're a little bit cheaper. So I guess maybe if you're more of a beginner or you're not too confident in your film abilities, you might want to go with an FE. So that's pretty much my opinion on the differences in preferability of the FE versus FM Nikon family cameras. So hopefully this can help somebody a little bit if you're kind of on the fence or not sure which one to buy. If you have any more questions, just leave them in the comments. I'll try to do some reviews later on these lenses. I like both of these lenses a lot. I'll save which one I like better for the actual review. But that'll be another video I'm working on in the future, so stay tuned for that one.